In Lagos, the city did not ask who you were. It asked only what you carried, on your body, in your pocket, inside your eyes. The streets were always awake, humming with horns, sweat, ambition, and lies. Some people learned to survive by shouting louder than others. Some survived by becoming invisible. Amara Okonkwo belonged to the second group. She lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Surulere, where the walls held heat long after sunset and neighbors greeted each other through iron gates. Every morning, she tied her hair back simply, wore dresses that had seen better days, and boarded public buses that smelled of engine oil and patience. No one suspected that her quietness was intentional, that her simplicity was chosen, not forced. Amara had grown up between two worlds. One was the village of Umuocha in Anambra State, where red dust clung to ankles and elders spoke in proverbs that took years to fully understand. The other was Lagos, loud and restless, where dreams either grew sharp teeth or got eaten alive. Her father died early, leaving her mother, Ngozi Okonkwo, to raise her with firmness and gentleness mixed like palm wine, sweet at first, strong afterward. Ngozi was not a woman who trusted appearances. She used to tell Amara stories at night when electricity failed and kerosene lamps flickered. Stories of men who loved with mouths but not with hands, of relatives who smiled while sharpening knives behind their backs. She taught Amara that wealth should be hidden until character revealed itself. "Before you show a man your gold," her mother once said, "first see how he treats you when he thinks you have none." When Ngozi died suddenly from a stroke, Amara was only 23. At the burial, important-looking men arrived quietly, spoke in low voices, signed documents, then disappeared. Amara did not ask questions. Her mother had prepared everything. What she left behind was not just money, but instruction, sealed trusts, lawyers bound by silence, and a single message written in shaky handwriting: "Wait." 5 years later, Amara met Colonel Adeyemi. It happened on a rainy evening near Yaba, when traffic had turned the road into a river of brake lights. Colonel offered her space under his umbrella while they waited for a Danfo bus. He was charming, talkative, confident in the way men were when they believed the future owed them something. He wore polished shoes and spoke of work stress, promotions, and big plans. Amara listened, smiled politely, and said little. Colonel liked that. He liked that she did not challenge him, did not compete, did not demand. To him, Amara felt safe. She was educated but not intimidating, beautiful but not loud, ambitious but not aggressive. She worked as an administrative assistant at a small logistics company and never complained about salary. Colonel assumed he was the prize. Their relationship grew in ordinary ways. Cheap restaurants. Shared plates of rice. Long phone calls at night when generators hummed in the background. Colonel paid more often, not because Amara asked, but because he wanted to feel like a provider. When he talked about marriage, his voice carried pride, as if he was announcing a promotion. Amara loved him, but carefully. She noticed details others ignored. How Colonel treated waiters. How he spoke about poor relatives. How his kindness sometimes paused when no one was watching. Still, love is not a courtroom. It gives benefit of doubt even when evidence whispers otherwise. 3 years passed. When Colonel proposed, it was in a small restaurant in Ikeja, not fancy, not cheap. He knelt awkwardly, produced a modest ring, and spoke about building a future together. Amara said yes, because she believed in effort, and because tests are not meant to destroy, they are meant to reveal. Wedding discussions began quickly. Colonel talked about venues, guest lists, colors. He wanted something that showed progress, something that told his colleagues he had arrived. Amara agreed to most things but kept her contributions limited. When Colonel asked why she was not excited about expensive choices, she smiled and said softly, "We should live within our means." That sentence began to irritate him. Around the same time, Zainab Bello returned to Nigeria. Zainab and Amara had been close during university, bonded by shared struggle and borrowed notes. But while Amara chose quiet growth after graduation, Zainab chased visibility. She moved to London, married briefly, divorced loudly, and returned to Lagos with money that spoke before she did. Zainab lived in Banana Island now, wore confidence like jewelry, and treated Lagos like a stage built for her return. When Zainab invited Amara to lunch, Amara accepted without suspicion. Old friendships deserved respect. Kunal insisted on joining, eager to meet the rich friend abroad. The restaurant was expensive, the kind where chairs were heavier than conscience. Zainab arrived late, smiling, perfume announcing her presence. Kunal noticed everything. He noticed her designer bag, her watch, the way staff rushed to her table. Zainab noticed him too, the hunger behind his ambition, the way his eyes followed money instinctively. Amara noticed the silence between them, the subtle dance of interest. After that day, Kunal mentioned Zainab often. Too often. He spoke of her connections, her lifestyle, her confidence. Amara listened without reaction. Instead, she adjusted herself quietly. She began dressing down more. Older clothes. Less makeup. She complained mildly about transport costs. She delayed wedding payments. Kunal's tone changed gradually. His calls became shorter. His patience thinned. When Amara spoke about helping her village after marriage, Kunal frowned. "We need to focus on ourselves first," he said. "Myself," Amara heard. One evening, Kunal said he had a work hangout at a lounge in Victoria Island. Amara nodded and stayed home. Something inside her felt unsettled, like harmattan dust before a storm. Later that night, she decided to step out. Not to spy. Just to walk. The lounge was loud with music and artificial laughter. Amara stood near the entrance, her simple dress out of place among sequins and suits. Then she saw Kunal. He was seated close to Zainab, too close. His hand rested on her wrist comfortably, familiarly. Zainab leaned in, laughing softly, touching his arm as if it belonged there. Kunal's face held a smile Amara had not seen in months, eager, unguarded, hungry. "I deserve more than managing," Kunal said, his voice low but clear enough. Zainab smiled. "Then take more." Amara did not confront them. She did not cry. She turned and walked away, her heart steady but heavy. Outside, the city continued as if nothing had happened. Cars honked. Street vendors shouted. Life did not pause for betrayal. When Amara reached home, her phone rang. The caller introduced himself calmly as Chief Obiora Okonkwo. He spoke of documents finalized, of trusts unlocked, of her mother's will officially executed. He spoke of numbers that did not feel real. He spoke of inheritance measured not in comfort, but in power. Amara thanked him politely and ended the call. That night, she sat on her bed, staring at the wall. Love had failed its test. Wealth had answered its call. By morning, Amara Okonkwo had made two decisions. The wedding was cancelled. And the waiting was over. The news of the cancelled wedding traveled faster than truth ever did. In Lagos, rumors did not walk, they ran. By the third day, neighbors in Surulere whispered behind curtains, church women paused mid-prayer to exchange looks, and Kunal's family phones buzzed with unanswered questions. To most people, it sounded like foolishness. Who cancels a wedding 3 weeks to the date? What kind of woman does that without explanation? Amara did not explain. She packed her small apartment quietly, not in haste, not in anger. Each folded dress carried memory, not regret. The faded blue gown she wore when she first met Kunal was placed gently into a box, not because she wanted to keep it, but because throwing it away felt like denying a lesson. By the time Kunal arrived unannounced, pounding on her door with wounded pride, the apartment was already empty. He found her sitting on the floor among boxes, calm, almost detached. That calm unsettled him more than shouting ever could. "Amara, what is this nonsense?" he demanded, pacing. "People are calling me. My mother is crying. My colleagues are laughing. You cannot just cancel a wedding like that." Amara looked up at him slowly. "You're worried about laughter," she said softly, "not loyalty." Kunal scoffed. "So now you're accusing me of something?" Because I spoke to a friend? Zainab is rich, yes, but does that mean I cannot talk to her? Amara studied his face the way a doctor studies symptoms. The defensiveness, the anger, the absence of guilt. She realized then that confronting him with details would not bring clarity, it would only invite lies. I don't want to marry you any more, she said simply. Kunnel froze. Men like him were not used to finality delivered without drama. You think you can do better, he snapped. With what? Your salary. Your village dreams. Amara stood up slowly, dusting her dress. This conversation is over. Kunnel left, slamming the door behind him, convinced he was the victim of madness. He did not know yet that the ground beneath him had shifted. Within a week, Amara disappeared from Suralire. She moved into a serviced apartment in Ikoyi, not flashy, but secure. Lawyers began to arrive. Accountants. Men and women who spoke carefully and bowed their heads when they addressed her. The world her mother had hidden unfolded quietly, layer by layer. Her mother, Ngozi Okonkwo, had been more than a trader, more than a simple woman with a calm voice. She had been an investor, a silent partner, a woman who understood that visibility invited danger. Over decades, she built wealth through shipping, oil servicing, real estate, and foreign investments, all shielded under structures designed to wait patiently for Amara. When the figures were finally revealed, Amara felt no excitement. She felt weight. Money did not scream joy. It whispered responsibility. Meanwhile, Kunnel's life began to unravel in small humiliations. He called Amara repeatedly. When she stopped answering, he sent long messages apologizing, blaming stress, blaming misunderstanding. He avoided mentioning Zainab directly, hoping vagueness would erase evidence. But silence has a way of making truth louder. He finally confronted Zainab. She listened with polite boredom as he complained about Amara's stubbornness. When he suggested they could help each other move on, Zainab laughed, not unkindly, but dismissively. Kunnel, she said, adjusting her sunglasses, I like ambitious men, not complicated situations. I didn't ask you to destroy your life. That was when Kunnel realized something painful. He had never been the choice. He had only been an option. Zainab moved on quickly. Rich people always did. Amara, on the other hand, returned to Umuocha village. The elders welcomed her with cautious warmth. News of wealth traveled slower there, but news of cancelled weddings carried moral weight. Women whispered. Men speculated. Some assumed Amara had failed as a woman. Others believed she had escaped disgrace. She did not correct them. She sat with her grandmother's age-mates, listening to stories older than roads. She watched children fetch water from streams that should have dried decades ago. She noticed the clinic with no medicine, the school with no roof, the roads that swallowed motorbikes after rain. And she decided. The first project she approved was a borehole. Clean water. No ceremony. No banner. The second was a small scholarship fund for village girls. When elders asked why she was doing these things alone, she answered, because help delayed is help denied. Only then did whispers of her inheritance begin to take shape. Kunnel found out the truth the same way he found out everything else, late. A former colleague forwarded him an article buried in a business column. Low-profile heiress takes control of Okonkwo Holdings. The name Amara Okonkwo stared back at him, attached to figures that made his stomach tighten. He laughed at first. Then he read again. His phone slipped from his hand. The woman he had belittled. The woman he thought needed saving. She had been richer than every room he ever entered. Kunnel went back to Amara one last time, armed with humility and desperation. This time, he arrived at her Ikoyi residence, guarded, polished, untouchable. Security stopped him before he reached the gate. He called. She answered. Amara, he said, voice shaking. I didn't know. If I had known. That's the point, she replied calmly. You didn't need to know. He begged. He blamed temptation. He promised change. He reminded her of memories. Amara listened quietly, then said words that ended everything. "You didn't fail because you flirted," she said. "You failed because your respect depended on my perceived value." The call ended. In Umuocha, elders poured libation in her name, not because of money, but because of composure. A woman who could walk away from betrayal without burning bridges was considered strong. Yet at night, alone, Amara cried. Not for Cunnel, but for the version of herself that believed love alone was enough. Somewhere between grief and healing, a new chapter of her life began, not announced, not rushed, but steady. And unknown to her, someone was watching her not with hunger, not with envy, but with respect. His name was Tund Afalayan. Tund Afalayan did not announce himself in Amara's life. He entered quietly, the way morning light slips into a room before anyone notices the sun has risen. He was an architect overseeing a state-funded rural development project, assigned to supervise road rehabilitation and community housing across several villages, including Umuocha. To most people, he was just another professional passing through. To Amara, he was initially invisible. She first noticed him not because he spoke to her, but because he listened. During a village meeting, elders argued loudly about land boundaries and compensation. Politicians sent representatives who promised much and delivered nothing. Tund sat at the back, notebook resting on his knee, observing without interrupting. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, respectful, measured. He addressed elders with proverbs, not instructions. He spoke to youths without condescension. He never once mentioned Amara's name or status. That restraint caught her attention. Amara had grown accustomed to being treated differently since news of her wealth spread. Some villagers bowed too deeply. Others laughed too loudly. Relatives she barely remembered appeared with proposals disguised as concern. Tund did none of that. When he spoke to her, it was about borehole placement, school access roads, soil quality. Practical things. Necessary things. Their conversations were brief at first. Polite greetings. Shared observations. Over time, those greetings stretched into discussions about development, about the tension between tradition and progress, about how African cities swallowed villages without digesting them properly. Tund spoke with conviction, but without arrogance. Amara found herself listening the way she once listened to Cunnel, except now there was no unease. Meanwhile, Cunnel's life continued its slow collapse. At work, his performance slipped. Promotions he once anticipated passed him by quietly. Colleagues who used to seek his opinion now avoided him. He became restless, resentful, blaming unseen enemies for his stagnation. He watched Amara from afar through news articles and whispers. Every mention of her success felt like salt rubbed into a wound he refused to clean. He told himself stories to survive. That Amara had changed. That money had poisoned her. That she had deceived him. These lies gave him comfort, but they did not give him peace. Zainab was long gone from his life, absorbed into a new relationship with a foreign investor whose name Cunnel struggled to pronounce. She had no reason to look back. In Umuocha, Amara expanded her projects carefully. She rebuilt the health clinic, stocked it with medicine, hired qualified nurses from the nearest town. She funded adult literacy classes for women who had never held a pen confidently. She insisted that contracts be transparent, that laborers be paid fairly. When some elders questioned her firmness, she smiled and said, "Respect does not disappear because a woman is kind." Still, inside her, trust remained fractured. She enjoyed Tund's company but guarded her heart fiercely. She had learned how easily admiration could rot into entitlement. When Tund once offered to walk her home after a meeting, she declined politely. He accepted without offense. That, too, mattered. One evening, heavy rain trapped several people inside the community hall. Power failed. Phones dimmed. The air smelled of wet earth and damp clothes. Tund and Amara found themselves seated near each other, listening to rain beat the roof like impatient fingers. "You don't speak much about yourself," Tund said gently. Amara smiled faintly. Some stories are still healing. Tund nodded. Healing doesn't need an audience. That was the moment something shifted. Not attraction. Recognition. In Lagos, Cunnell made one last attempt to reclaim dignity. He showed up uninvited at a charity fundraising dinner Amara attended. The hall buzzed with elite conversation. Amara wore a simple but elegant gown. Confidence settled comfortably on her shoulders. Cunnell approached her table, ignoring security warnings. "I just want to talk," he pleaded softly. Amara looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just distance. "You're interrupting," she said calmly. People watched. Cunnell felt the weight of eyes and expectation. He wanted drama, tears, validation. He got none. As security escorted him away, something inside Cunnell finally broke, not loudly, but definitively. For the first time, he accepted that what he lost could not be recovered. Not because of money, but because of who he had been when no one was watching. Back in Umuocha, Amara fell ill briefly from exhaustion. Tund visited, not with gifts or speeches, but with warm soup prepared by his aunt. He left it at her doorstep with a short note wishing her strength. He did not ask to come in. That night, Amara cried again, but this time the tears were different. They were not heavy with grief. They were light, uncertain, hopeful. Weeks passed. The village changed visibly. Roads smoothed. Water flowed. Children laughed more easily. People began to associate Amara's name not with wealth, but with impact. One afternoon, as Amara and Tund inspected a newly completed classroom, a child tugged at Amara's dress and asked innocently, "Auntie, is this your husband?" Amara laughed, surprised. Tund smiled awkwardly. "No," Amara said gently. The child frowned. "Why not?" The question lingered long after the child ran away. That evening, under a mango tree heavy with fruit, Tund finally spoke openly. He told Amara about his past, failed relationships, career setbacks, his belief that love should feel safe, not performative. He told her he admired her strength, but more than that, her restraint. "I don't want to rush you," he said. "I just wanted you to know my intentions are clean." Amara listened. Her heart beat faster, not with fear, but with possibility. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted. Tund nodded. "Readiness grows. I'm patient." As night settled over Umuocha, Amara realized something quietly profound. Revenge had not healed her. Success had not healed her. Time alone had not healed her. But respect, consistent, unforced respect, was beginning to. And somewhere far away, Cunnell sat alone in his apartment, understanding too late that the greatest inheritance Amara had received was not money, but wisdom. Time has a way of softening sharp memories, but it never erases lessons. For Amara, the months that followed were not dramatic. There were no public confrontations, no viral scandals, no loud declarations of victory. Life simply continued, steadier now, more intentional. Umuocha changed visibly. The dusty road that once swallowed motorcycles during rainy season became smooth enough for buses to pass without fear. The clinic began receiving patients from neighboring villages. Women who once whispered complaints now spoke with confidence. Children walked to school without balancing fear and fatigue on their heads. Amara watched it all quietly, not with pride, but with fulfillment. She did not brand the projects with her name. She refused plaques and ceremonies. "Let the work speak," she told the elders. In a society where visibility was often mistaken for value, her restraint became her signature. Tund remained present, consistent, unpressured. He did not attempt to impress her with promises or possessions. Instead, he showed up. When meetings ran late, he waited. When Amara withdrew into silence, he respected it. When she spoke, he listened without planning a response. One evening, after a long day of inspections, Amara invited him to sit with her outside her grandmother's old house. The moon hung low, generous with light. Crickets sang without coordination. The village breathed slowly. "I used to think strength meant never needing anyone," Amara said quietly. "Then I learned that strength can also mean choosing wisely." Tund said nothing. He had learned that silence was sometimes the most respectful answer. "I was tested," she continued, her voice steady. "Not by poverty. Not by wealth. By love. And I learned that affection without respect is a debt that grows interest." Tund finally spoke. "I don't want to be your reward," he said. "I want to be your partner." Amara smiled. Not the polite smile she gave the world, but the soft one she reserved for truth. In Lagos, Cunnell's story faded into obscurity. Not because he suffered publicly, but because he stagnated privately. His life became a cycle of almosts, almost promoted, almost married, almost respected. He avoided news about Amara, but her name still surfaced occasionally, usually attached to success stories, philanthropic initiatives, international partnerships. Each time, he felt a dull ache, not of jealousy, but of recognition. He understood now that he had not lost Amara because he flirted. He lost her because his values were conditional. And conditions, once exposed, collapse under scrutiny. He never reached out again. Zainab, on the other hand, watched from afar with a mix of admiration and discomfort. She had built her life on visibility, on leverage, on advantage. Amara's quiet dominance unsettled her. There was no access point, no weakness to exploit. Eventually, Zainab stopped trying to reconnect. Some doors close without noise. Back in Umuocha, the elders called for a meeting one afternoon. Not about land. Not about funding. About Amara. They spoke in measured tones, acknowledging her contributions, her humility, her respect for tradition. Then they asked a question wrapped in culture and concern. "When will we pour wine for your future?" an elder asked gently. Amara understood. Marriage, in their eyes, was not just union, it was continuity. She glanced at Tund, who sat quietly at the edge of the gathering, saying nothing, expecting nothing. "I will answer when my heart finishes speaking," she replied. The elders nodded. They had lived long enough to recognize honesty. Weeks later, during the New Yam Festival, laughter filled the village square. Drums spoke. Women danced. Children ran barefoot, sticky with joy. Amara stood among them, not as benefactor, not as heiress, but as daughter of the soil. Tund approached her beneath the old mango tree, the same one where her grandmother once told moonlight stories. There was no ring, no kneeling, no crowd. "I don't have a dramatic speech," he said simply. "But I have consistency. I have respect. And I have patience." Amara felt tears rise, not from pain, but from relief. "Yes," she said. The word landed softly, but its meaning echoed deeply. Their union was celebrated traditionally, with care and authenticity. No extravagance. No competition. Just truth. Palm wine flowed. Elders prayed. Drums spoke blessings into the night. Amara wore a simple wrapper, her head held high. She did not feel like a woman who had won. She felt like a woman who had chosen well. Later that night, as stars scattered generously across the sky, Amara thought of her mother. Of the letter that said wait. Of the wisdom hidden beneath simplicity. Of the test that had revealed everything it needed to. She realized then that inheritance was not just money. It was discernment. It was timing. It was the courage to walk away before bitterness took root. Love had returned to her life, not loudly, not recklessly, but honestly. And that, she knew, was the greatest wealth she would ever hold.